We are hearing feedback, so if you called in, could you please go ahead and mute yourself? It is so wonderful to have so many familiar names popping up on the screen here. Especially wonderful to see those names popping up after so many of us are getting back from Hawaii. I hope you all are feeling tan and well rested, and that some of you got to stay a little bit after the Access to Capital convening OESIS conference. You heard right. This is the second of the CDFI Fund's Capacity Building Initiative webinar from the Building Native CDFI Sustainability and Impact 2 initiative. We are going to be discussing today successful lending practices, turning loan prospects into successful applicants. And this is such a challenge. Many of our native CDFIs really struggle with building out a good borrower pipeline and losing many through kind of the funnel of the development services process, trying to get people through all of the different stages of loan application. And so we really wanted to spend some time to give you all a chance to reflect and talk together around this issue. And our goal for this is to understand the challenges related to loan completion, to develop strategies to overcome those barriers to application completion, improve the application forms to reduce applicant frustration and increase the number of folks who are actually completing your applications, learn best practices to streamline the process, and think about developing simple tracking mechanisms and processes for pipeline monitoring to really help you all get a sense of how many folks from the beginning of your process to the end are falling out through the whole process. So super excited to have this time for conversation with you. Please use the chat feature so that we can make sure that everyone is getting to share what they have learned in this process too, because we're all in this together and learning together.
Before we get started, and we do see your request to speak up a little bit, we are trying to get our microphones situated and project better. We have a quick little disclaimer for you. This presentation was funded by the CDFI Fund under the contract number listed before you. These opinions that we express are those of me, Emily, and Crystal here with me, and so they don't reflect the opinions of the CDFI or any other person or organization. Just so we can get that little legal thing out of the way before we get started. So I think we'd like to first introduce ourselves a little bit. My name is Emily Trump. I'm the Lending and Compliance Manager here at First Nations OESTA. OESTA is a CDFI. We are an intermediary, which means we lend to and provide technical assistance to other native CDFIs. So if you have worked with OESTA to get a loan, you may have worked with me. I met Crystal working for a CDFI on the Crow Creek Reservation now years ago, where we did consumer and micro-enterprise loans. This webinar is going to be mostly from the context of that experience that we had, and primarily discussing loan applicants from the position of business loans. Since those are some of the most difficult in our experience to get to a completed application. But we welcome your input and thoughts on all kinds of lending that CDFIs do, and hope you can share your own experiences in the chat box so that we can all learn from each other's experience. Crystal, do you want to?
And I'm Crystal Langholtz. I'm Chief Operating Officer of First Nations OESTA Corporation. And as Emily said, I was the Executive Director of a grassroots Native CDFI in the Crow Creek Reservation. And so super happy to have the opportunity to talk about this issue with you all. So the first thing that you have to do if you want to have successful applicants is to build up a good field of potential loan applicants. You want to have a good reach on your marketing and to find potential applicants for your potential applicants in a variety of different places. Traditional marketing can include newspaper ads, radio hits, flyers, direct mail. When you think of what your marketing strategy is going to be, you need to think about what your clients read and listen to. Where are they going? Are most of them online? And if so, what sites are they visiting? And that can really help you develop what your marketing plan looks like. Facebook and Twitter can be cheaper ways to engage with potential borrowers, but building an online presence takes time. Make sure your advertising approach matches the services you offer and vice versa. If most of your applicants are coming to you from Facebook or your website, are you set up to accept their applicants online too? Our next webinar is going to be focusing on marketing too, so I just put that out there, so look for the registration information to come about that webinar.
I'd like to jump in here and say this doesn't need to be fancy or complicated. On Crow Creek, we found that one of the best ways to get our message out was to put up flyers at the post office because everybody came in and checked their box. And so we didn't have to spend a lot of money or spend a lot of time driving around. There were only a few places in our community where we needed to put up notices. After that, word of mouth did most of the work for us.
Right. Your development services not only serve as training opportunities for your borrowers and future borrowers, they are also free advertisements for your loan products. If the quality of your training is good and you really connect with your clients, you're building trust that can then translate to having complete loan applicants. Providing resources and referrals to multiple sources will help keep your trainings from feeling like a sales pitch. Also, don't be afraid to use your ongoing TA relationships with borrowers to make them aware of the other services you offer. Today's credit builder borrower may need a home improvement loan next year. Startup businesses might want to expand and so on and so forth. And I would say that, for us on Crow Creek, one of the best advertisement for us was every year we would do VITA tax services in our office. And we would have like half the reservation come in and get their taxes done with us. And that was the perfect time to have people talk about their talk about their credit, if they needed a credit repair loan, and to advertise all of our other services. So you can really use all of the development services that you have to help capture potential borrowers. But as Emily already started to address, happy borrowers are your best advocates. That word of mouth is so critical, and you feel that. Encouraging your clients to spread the word with their family and friends is huge. Business lenders, will also oftentimes be present in the business community, attending art fairs, presenting at Chamber of Commerce meetings. An example of us for what we did on Crow Creek was we had everyone that we financed that received a small business loan from us, had a little sign in their shop that said, this business financed by Hunkwati Investments, right? And so that was a way of our borrowers being our advertisement, right? If your business borrowers don't have an opportunity network, you can consider hosting an event or establishing a mentoring program to help them get connected with one another. Finally, huge, making sure other partner organizations understand your products and how they benefit your community. Making sure they have the business cards, flyers, and website links to hand out of their offices. And most native CDFIs use a variety of those different types of approaches, but using kind of a wide swath of those different approaches is sure to get you a wider pool of potential applicants.
Yes, and I'd like to add, especially with on the referral by partners, I'm going to say some things during this webinar that might be interpreted as being negative towards banks. That is not That is not the view I want to communicate here. I believe that banks and CDFIs, CDFI loan funds, can really serve different roles and combined do a better job of creating financial opportunity in your community. So please, throughout this webinar, don't take the positive things I say about CDFIs as an attack on banks, because they can be a wonderful source of referrals for your CDFI, because they will get applicants and have clients who may not be a fit for their loan products but may be perfect for your CDFI.
Right. And if you're interested in building one of those relationships with a local bank, you know, I encourage you to go in there and meet with all of the staff that work there, because oftentimes it was the frontline staff that were going to be denying people loans, or that were our biggest, you know, they don't like having to tell people no, right? And so making sure that everyone in the bank, not just the branch manager, knows about your products and services is really important, because then they felt, you know, there was a certain sense of relief among those bank partners to be able to hand out our card as another opportunity for people to go look for capital. So we want to hear from you now. We'd like to launch a poll, and we would like to learn about where your organization receives finds your potential applicants. So go ahead and vote. We'd like to hear where most of your organization receives their loan applications.
All right. Looks like word of mouth is the winner by a huge lead.
Landslide.
Landslide. So this just emphasizes that, you know, the people you work with, whether they're just people receiving TA services or people who have already received loans from you, are your best advocates in the community. And making sure that people have a positive experience when they apply for a loan with you, which is a lot of what this webinar is addressing, is huge in making sure you get the next loan down the line from that person's friend or auntie or coworker.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the application process. And, you know, applications don't happen in a single step. You know, oftentimes you can have, I think the longest application process we had on Crow Creek was maybe like 2 years, right, from the time the person comes in to the time they finish the application. Don't let it be that long. But, you know, it doesn't happen in a single step. And even the simplest loan application can put up barriers that might scare people away. You know, does the client need to gather pay stubs before applying? Do they need to complete a required financial education class? What can you do to reduce the back and forth in this process and to try to keep it streamlined? Your procedures for collecting loan applications may be part of your formal loan policies, or they may have developed more organically. Make sure that all members of your staff understand the steps and materials needed for completing loan applications. If you can't answer an applicant's questions, give them the name and the contact information for the staff member who will be following up with them. And I think it's really critical we say that following up with them, you know, you want the burden to be on you to do the follow-up. In the case of if there's a question that they had that came out, you know, people are busy and they're oftentimes going to forget. And so making sure that if you had something that you got stuck with a friend, that you're the one who's following up with them. on those pieces, it's one less barrier that can come up there. You also really want to make sure that requirements are communicated clearly, along with dates for any upcoming trainings and all those sorts of things. But one thing that's huge through this process is transparency with your clients. We had issues, many of you, and I know many of you do this, where, maybe your loan committee meets once a month. Maybe it's kind of every other month. Things get stretched out. Someone goes on Christmas vacation. If there are going to be delays on your end, or there are going to be process concerns where somebody might not qualify, the more you can do to transparently communicate those concerns in advance to the client. You don't want to scare them away, but you also don't want them to be surprised and about any of those kinds of delays or concerns. So being really transparent with your process, and when you can, be linking them back to policy, that it's our policy to do it like this, is pretty helpful for helping maintain the relationship through the application process. Also, the more supporting documents your application requires, the more follow-up that will be required by CDFI staff. So your business loan applicants need help putting together a marketing plan. So they have trouble coming up with financial statements, communicating those expectations up front, and referring applicants to resources, both internal and external, can really help get through some of those barriers. Also, be clear on timelines, as we talked about. Do you need to meet a deadline in order for your loan committee to consider an application? Making sure that they know when those are, helping people from getting discouraged. And, up here I didn't specifically outline what's on this slide, but for those of you who are maybe just calling in and can't see it, it details out the loan application process, which is where you start with client inquiry. And then many of us go to require technical assistance. I know some of us require financial education classes or other kinds of resources, one-on-one TA, before they can be eligible for a loan. Then they go through the applicant and supporting document stage. And then, as many of you know, in the underwriting process, there's a lot of follow-up and back and forth on questions that come up through that process. And so when you think about the funnel of your native CDFI borrowers through this process, it's important to think about where are you losing people, because that can tell you a lot about which part of the process is your breaking down point at this point. Okay, so one place where we lose people, and I think there's a tension here. One of the things I'll just call out, right? If you want your application process to be relatively easy, right? You don't want to lose people in the process. You don't want people to hate you, right? you want to make it accessible. That's the whole point. We're providing accessible products and services. But you also, you don't want to be bending over backwards for folks either, because, in my experience, and I think Emily would feel this way too, but the more we bent over backwards for clients, the more likely those borrowers were to not really be invested in the process, right? You get to the point where you're practically writing business plans for people, or you're, helping track down all their paperwork, and they weren't really invested in the process, right? And those are the loans that went delinquent and we had to write off, right? So you want it to be accessible, but I think there's also the tension of wanting it to weed out the potential bad borrowers too, right? So we're going to be pointing out ways to make things more streamlined, ways to make things easier. I think it's also okay to just be honest about the fact that you're going to be living in that tension between wanting your process to weed out people who aren't invested too.
Right. A recurring theme in this presentation is going to be that the application process sets the tone for the relationship you're going to have with your borrower for the length of the loan. So you want a borrower who feels welcome in your office. You want a borrower who feels comfortable admitting when they don't know something, comfortable asking for help. You don't want a borrower who expects you to fix all of their problems for you, for them. So
exactly.
I think Crystal's point there is exactly.
Like Diana agrees. Yes. I see her in the chat feature. That's great. Great. So making your forms user-friendly. And I will also say my tension here is in one of my other hats. You all know I'm super into impact. So, this is also the tension between wanting our forms to be user-friendly, but also wanting them to capture good impact data too. So I'll just call that out. But many CDFIs have moved to offering both paper and online applications. Remember, different clients have different skill sets. Some may be more comfortable completing an online form. Others might not have access to a computer or need help completing a paper form. Consider making a computer or workspace available for client use. And we've seen some clients successfully do that are, for example, using the Otis system, where they're using a portal and having clients complete their loan application in a specific portal where, maybe their borrowers aren't super tech savvy, and so they've set up computers in their office where they can be there to answer questions as people go along. But that's a way of getting it into a digital database from the get-go while still understanding that your borrowers need some help and support, sometimes with computer literacy. If your clients have strict hours, trying to make your staff available during scheduled lunch hours or before and after work. If you have paper applications, totally recommend that you take them for a test drive before you hand them out to people. Make sure you've left enough space for your clients to fill out the information. There are no prizes for fitting your application on a single page. Make sure to pay attention to anything that's frustrating when you try filling them out. If you have outdated information about your loan products, typos, this is a bad one, but CDFI jargon, or that might only be relevant or might only make sense to your loan officer. Your loan application form signals to borrowers what the rest of your loan process is going to be like, and a bad application can scare people off. So make sure not to overload your applications with duplicate or unnecessary questions and avoid, but you also want to avoid unnecessary follow-up, right? So you want to get quite a bit of the information that you can at the front so that you're not calling them back with, oh, well, what was your mother's maiden name, or whatever question you're going to have with the follow-up that you need. If you need to collect demographic information for the USDA or get permission for a credit check, that kind of information should all be in the original application. So when you think about making your forms user-friendly, you got to make some decisions. Easy bullet points here, but decide whether you want them online versus paper or both, right? Watch the formatting, avoid jargon. Don't ask for unnecessary information, and try to ensure that help is available from the rest of your CDFI team.
Good. I think next we have a quick poll. Great. So this is asking, do you use paper applications, online applications, or both? This is something that I think has really changed in the...
Feel free to ask questions.
We started with the CDFI industry, so we're curious to see where the industry is at. I will also say I think the availability of smartphones has changed the game in a lot of our community. People who wouldn't otherwise have access to the internet are now able to get it on their phones. So if you have an online process and can make at least part of that navigable on a smartphone, that would be a real plus.
That's awesome. Looks like 62% of you are using both paper and online applications. No one's using just online, which makes total sense. Right. So, we highlighted the loan application forms. And if you're interested in seeing sample loan application forms, you can always reach out to Louisa afterwards. And we've got lots of native CDFIs that have volunteered and shared their loan application forms over the years that we'd be willing to share with you if you want to kind of do some of that double check on your own. But also just want to highlight, what the loan applications are doing is they're giving you the information you need for underwriting, and they're also providing you, collecting the information that you need for impact tracking and other sorts of things. So we just kind of wanted to highlight quickly here some best practices in collecting information for you all. If you already have information on a client from a prior loan or training relationship, try getting them to verify it rather than filling out another form. So many of you are using in impact tracking system that Louisa works with, a system where you have a core application form that is the same that basically all of your loan applications gather the same data for, and then have as specific questions that you would ask if you were asking if you were doing a business loan, or specific questions that you were asking if you were doing a consumer loan, and some of these follow-up pieces, so that you have that core information available on the client no matter what, right? So the idea here just being that if you have that information already from them, you want to avoid having them do it. First of all, because it puts up an unnecessary barrier, but also simply because it makes them feel like they're not known by you, right? Like, I filled this out for you already, don't you know me by now? Clients may not know off the top of their heads when they completed an entrepreneurship course or what their employee phone number is. So, having a resource directory right there to help them quickly access this information is helpful, so that if they're filling it out if they're filling it out with you in your app in your office, you don't lose them to go, oh, I'll take it home and fill it out there, and they never come back. Which maybe they weren't a great borrower then too, right? But every data point you collect should be either necessary for your impact data collection or part of your risk assessment and decision-making process. Beware of information you ask because everyone else is collecting it, or an old funder wanted it, or we always have just asked for that, right? So maybe you saw it on someone else's loan application when you were developing yours, and they needed it for a funder, and you just kind of copied it. But a lot of times we see that where people are borrowing or sharing, which is great. Definitely do that. But sometimes you end up tracking information and that's not important to you, that was important to your friends with whom you were sharing information.
Yeah, and a little confession here. For a long time, all of the loan applications I worked with asked for personal budget information, which was fantastic and exactly what we needed when we were working with clients on building their credit and working with them in financial education and credit counseling. But when an established businessman came and wanted to apply for a loan for a piece of large equipment, he found that question a little intrusive. And we realized that that wasn't something that was going into either, it wasn't something a funder needed. Our funders weren't asking about family budgets and how much he spent on cable TV. And it wasn't an important part in the evaluation of the loan. We were actually looking at the finances of the business itself, and how he spent his personal money wasn't any of our business. So we took that out from some of our loan applications because we realized we were asking things just because we had always.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not all loan products require the same information. You're totally right. So yeah, reviewing those applications regularly, making sure they match the information that you're using for underwriting and reporting, huge. Communicate with your applicants regularly so they know where they're at in the process and what they need to do next. Make sure, though, that you and your staff are staying organized. You don't want to have to ask for the same form again because it got misfiled. Borrowers rely on you to keep their personal information confidential, so a CDFI that misplaces your information does not feel safe. So next we're going to do another poll. I
think we, sorry, just got our slides a little mixed up here. Apologies for that. So the next thing we're going to discuss is some of the most common barriers we've seen crop up with clients and some strategies for addressing. So process confusion, when we discussed the loan application process earlier, that is not necessarily intuitive to clients, so that can be a barrier. A sense of not belonging in that clients may not feel comfortable in your office or feel comfortable identifying themselves as entrepreneurs. Lack of legal documentation or financial statements. When we ask for complicated paperwork, that can be really difficult for clients. Not having defined goals. What is the client looking to achieve with a loan from your CDFI? And also just competing priorities. Working with your CDFI and getting a loan is not the only thing that people have going on in their lives. So with process confusion, communication is key. Have your information organized and easy to access. Make sure you're using your client's preferred communication styles, website, flyers, one-on-one conversation, the same things we discussed earlier talking about marketing. Remember, CDFIs are usually a better choice for your borrowers than other funding sources they might consider. It's better to get a business loan at 8% than pay 20% on your credit card for a startup business. And your CDFI reinvests the payments you receive in your community. So your borrowers' on-time payments help their neighbors. This should all be something you communicate with your clients. Borrowers who understand your mission and the TA, the technical assistance available to them, are more likely to be successful down the road. The requirements for being approved for a loan, this is one where I always found it tempting to skip over stuff or make the application process sound easy in order to make clients enthusiastic. Just as applying for a loan from a CDFI has advantages over traditional financial institutions, it can also be a lot more complicated and it can take more time. That's because the CDFI is looking at things that go a little bit beyond credit score. And so your evaluation process has a lot more hands-on and one-on-one involvement. That's great for your borrowers because you can get to know them on an individual basis. And the investment of time that you require in attending mandatory training sessions, that's setting your borrowers up for success. We know that. We know from looking at our outcomes and tracking our successful and unsuccessful borrowers that investment of time and education is necessary. That's why CDFIs are making different loans than traditional banks that are still being successful. But if your clients don't know that, they may feel that a delay or a loan application process that asks a lot of questions creates a negative experience for them. So again, we keep harping on communication, but that's really true. I think if you explain to your borrowers how the CDFI business model differs, they'll understand why you're asking these questions, why it's taking the time that it is. And they'll stick with you through the process.
And I was just going to say, if process confusion is a concern for you, which is to say you feel like you're in a space where people are confused about your process and you're not explaining it very well, there's a thing you can do which is called client journey mapping, which is basically just a process you go through where you pretend to be a borrower and you're like, okay, so what do? I come in the door. Okay, who talks to me then? And you go through the entire process of looking at your loan application steps from the borrower's perspective. And you basically jot down what each of those steps are, right? And then you can easily make that into a 5-point bullet points of first you do this, and then second this will happen, and third this will happen, so that it's really easy for the borrowers to understand. So play acting and kind of pretending that you're the borrower like that can really help you understand what your process is so that you can easily communicate it, and maybe even make some marketing materials that are clear around that. But also it can help you find out where the hang-ups are happening too, right? If I've done the client journey mapping thing where I have been like, I actually don't know what the next step in the process is. That's not good. As a staff person, if I don't know what the next step in the process is, you better believe the borrower doesn't, right? So doing some of that, play acting, pretending that you're the client and trying to figure out what all the different steps in the process are or what they should be can be really helpful for helping you communicate those things if you think your clients are experiencing process confusion.
We have a comment from Diana. She says, I have had one repeat person come in to inquire about a business loan, but he won't turn in his financials, such as tax papers, that are requested. Diana, I think we have all had that experience. We'll talk a little bit about those darn papers, especially financial reports, that are so difficult for our borrowers. I think this problem can crop up for a couple different reasons. One is the borrower may just not want to provide that information. We're asking for a lot of private, personal information that people are not used to sharing. And so I think some of that is being compassionate. Some of it is explaining what you're going to do with the information, how you're going to keep it safe, and how it's necessary for your loan approval process. I found it very useful to blame things on our funders because everybody understands that in order to make loans, we need money and we need to jump through a few hoops. So that can be useful in some contexts. Others, it's just helping them understand that, we need a picture of your financial life before we feel comfortable giving you thousands of dollars.
And that's where financial literacy is so helpful, right? Because if you, sometimes I would have borrowers that would come in and, I would reference, they had done, for example, our B&C training, right? And I would reference like, well, remember when we play acted that we were all loan committees? That's what's actually going to happen, guys. You're going to be actually going to a loan committee. And so, financial education can really help in that space too, with the more comfortable they are with the 5 C's of credit before they're sitting down with you to go through the application process, the easier your job is, for sure. So.
And Diana has interjected, or he hasn't filed. Yes, I think that's probably the other major explanation for why someone's having trouble providing tax documents. Here's where having a free income tax preparation site, either through your organization or another organization that you can partner with, can be helpful. I did spend a lot of time talking up the benefits of filing taxes, whether that's to access a refund or to document your business income so that you're paying for Social Security benefits. I think all of us know people who've struggled later in life because they didn't have a long enough record. That can be a real benefit to some of our entrepreneurs. And emphasize that this is not a special requirement that CDFIs came up with. If your borrower is going somewhere else for a mortgage, the loan underwriter there will expect to see income too. So, filing taxes, except for a small percentage of the population, is not optional. And so, whatever you can do through technical assistance, through education, to get those documents filed and then move on with the loan application is a benefit to your borrowers.
Yeah, and you can stress those benefits, but while still being on their side in that space, right? Which is to say, oh yeah, just so you know, though, we're not the feds. Like, we're not coming after you, right? So that they don't feel judged in that space. But yeah, as Emily said, there's a lot of ways to kind of support and provide education around the benefits of filing too.
Jonelle asks, do you have bullet points for the benefits for CDFI loan products? Any samples or sharing? I don't think we have. I know some CDFIs that do this well that I can double check with if they're willing to share out some of their materials. But that's a good question, Janelle. And we definitely have some examples of client journey maps that we can share with you. So definitely expect to follow us. Great. So our next, the next big barrier that we have is the sense of not belonging. Applying for a loan can be intimidating, especially if you've been turned down in the past with other lenders. Be sensitive to your client's sense of exclusion. So are you using lots of unfamiliar jargon, or are your expectations about their level of preparation or their credit score unrealistic? As we've discussed, your advantage as a CDFI is that you can be friendlier than a bank and less rigid than a government agency. Anything you can do to reduce the scariness of this and say to your clients, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to be confused. Everybody starts out this way. Yes, even the mega million businesses. No one was born knowing how the loan application process works or how to run a business. And we're here to help you and support you in this journey. But it also, this extends beyond the loan application process, and here's where I think that really helping to build the business community in your area is beneficial, because if potential borrowers can look at other people in their community and say, well, I know Joe, and he started a fishing guide business, and he was successful, then it'll be easier for them to picture themselves as entrepreneurs or as successful borrowers. So you can do this in hosting business fairs, getting especially your local artists out and visible in the community, being a presence, Chamber of Commerce meetings, if that's something that is visible in your community, highlighting your previous borrowers. We found that most of the people we worked with were very excited to have their pictures taken and posted up and shared around. People were eager to tell their stories, and that's great advertising for you as a CDFI, but it also shows your potential borrowers that this is the thing they can do. And an entrepreneur can be a person who looks like me.
Preach it, Emily.
So here we get to the lack of financial statements and documentation, and this is a real struggle for a lot of our borrowers, especially if you're working mostly with startup businesses. But this is challenging, even if you're doing consumer loans or housing loans, trying to get all the documentation in place that you need. Often that's where your clients go home with a list of things, and then you never hear from them again. So part of getting clients loan ready is helping them navigate these technical or difficult parts of the process. No one was born knowing how to prepare a cash flow projection, and so when working with them, try to identify the missing pieces as soon as possible. Helps prevent frustration, delays in the process. Also have any internal or external resources identified so that you can help clients create these financial statements if they don't have them already. Those invoices and receipts can be turned into financial statements and tax returns. I know, I have done it. And this is also where having a business community that has built up a little bit can be really beneficial. If you can at all help an accountant or bookkeeper put out a shingle, you can then refer your clients out that way. Take advantage of the Small Business Administration centers if those are nearby and useful to you.
And if they're not, make them come.
Yes.
That was always my strategy. We'll be your in into the community, and you just get your butt out here.
And keep track of what's holding up the applications. If all your clients are getting stuck in the same place, that's a warning sign. You want to think about what specific training or service you can provide that will help them. And just a reminder, because as I say this, it sounds like a lot of work, right?
It is a lot of work.
Yes. Right. It is a lot of work. And if these loans were easy to make, for-profit businesses would be making them right and left. We know that our borrowers are successful. We know that native CDFIs have extremely low loss rates. So we know that with the help that they need, our borrowers are very successful. But you can't get there by skipping the hard work that needs to come both from your clients and from the CDFI staff. So one difficulty that some loan applicants encounter is they come into your office and they know they want something. They're ambitious in their life or in their business, but they may have not really clearly defined their goals. It's very tempting to come in and say, well, I want a loan, but if the client hasn't really figured out what they want to use that loan for, they're unlikely to be successful in their goal. And in order to provide a client with the technical assistance they need, you first need to understand what are they looking for in their life beyond how can I get a big check. And sometimes there's a difference between being an entrepreneur versus being a car mechanic. Some clients are in love with their field, right? and they want to be the best construction worker or the best baker or the best beater in their community, but they're not enthusiastic about running their own business. And so helping them understand, first, do I want to be an entrepreneur? Because that's not, something that everyone is looking for in their life. But also, if that's not the part that I love, what are the ways in which other people in my community, other members of my family can support me in the business and help me focus on the things that I'm good at? And so CDFI can play an important role. I think sometimes we see borrowers drop out of the loan application process because their family is always going to be more important, the most important thing in their lives, right? That we know that is a fundamental part of the culture in Native communities. And as a loan officer or a TA provider at a CDFI, it's easy to get kind of tunnel vision and say, this loan application is the most important thing. Well, it's the most important thing that you're working on right now, but it is not the most important thing in the client's life. So, part of this is, some of this is not a barrier that you can simply overcome or get rid of. I just mention it here as a reminder to be compassionate and understand that sometimes delays are not anyone's fault, and they're certainly not a reflection of laziness or lack of enthusiasm from your borrower. They could very rightly be prioritizing more important things.
I think Emily's hit on something so critical here, especially for those of you who are doing some sort of small business lending, but I think it affects other areas of lending too. But there are these just competing priorities that are going to affect all of our borrowers in different stages, and including the loan application process. But I think of one of the first loans we ever made was to a man who was recently retired, and he wanted to do his own coffee shop. And he was wonderful, a wonderful elder in our community. And he got his coffee shop up and going. And he was going every day, and about 3 weeks into the grand opening of his little coffee business was like, you know what, I think I actually wanted to be retired so I could hang out with my grandbabies, right? He didn't want to be open all the time, and we were like, oh, okay, well, let's go back to the drawing board here, right? And so eventually got him into a little trailer that he got to take to powwows, and kind of got to bring his whole family in on different community events, and made it side money that way, and it got to be his little side business. But kind of went into it not really understanding that what he actually wanted was to be retired and have a little side business, not to be a coffee shop owner, right? So I think there's a lot of that you're going to be discovering along the way with them, but it's really important that they, if you're going to be giving them a loan, right, that they have a clear, defined goal, and that it's not what you guys are, putting on them. It's what they're wanting and where they need to be.
Yeah, and even clients who walk in with very clear visions of their goals, they may not be able to skip ahead to step 10 right away. So a client may come in and say that they want to buy a house, or they want to send their children to college. Big goals that will take time, and maybe, it's going to be a recurring process. You'll work with clients sometimes over and over again. A credit builder client this month can turn into a small business borrower next month once they're on a firmer financial footing. And so, Crystal talked about having a loan application drag on for years. That's not ideal, but certainly the relationship you have with potential borrowers can be a multi-year process, and that's really, again, a positive thing that CDFIs can do because you are providing this ongoing relationship. You can be with your borrowers, from day one and really see them from the first day of the opening of their state shop to the day they expand and open a second location. You can really be important partners in that journey for them, but it does require patience. So here we have another poll. I want to get everyone's sense of the biggest barrier in your loan application process. I especially encourage you to use the chat box to suggest other barriers that you have. I do think we'll have some time here to discuss things you've learned, barriers that you've encountered. So please, if we've left things out, add them in the chat box and we can share with everyone. I'm seeing a lot of people with confusion with the loan process. If any of you would feel comfortable sharing, are there any strategies that you've used that you found particularly successful?
I see a few of you are typing. Love it.
Jonelle says, depends on loan product. For business loans, it's the paperwork, legal or financial. Mm-hmm. Yes. And I think that's natural, and I think having the expectation that you're going to have the same conversion rate for business loan applications as you do for consumer loans or even housing loans is maybe a little over-optimistic. Sometimes that process is what makes people realize that they would rather not become entrepreneurs, and that's okay.
That's great, right?
We want people to build assets. We want people to have happy family lives. We want them to feel rewarded in their work, but certainly not everyone to start their own business.
Sharon says some have jobs, some don't have transportation or child care, could be a medical issue or even a death in the family. Absolutely, definitely under the competing priorities. People don't want to write a business plan. Yes, definitely.
And, people may not even know what a business plan should look like. And you might even want to consider for the amount of money that this person is requesting or the size of the business that they're planning, is a full business plan really what you need to evaluate the loan? A lot of times we see loan applications that aren't correctly sized to the amount of the loan. If you're making microenterprise loans, that loan application probably shouldn't look like the same application you hand to the established business that's asking for a $200,000 expansion.
So, for example, we at Humpati, I think everybody started having to do business plans, but then we were getting all these craftsmen that came in and they were like, we want a quilting machine for $4,000, and and so we eventually moved towards those people just had to be able to answer some very key questions about how they were going to market, and didn't have to go through the full business plan process, so that we were scaling the questions we were asking and appropriate to the size of the loan. So good, that's a good thing to discuss.
Natasha says some of our clients aren't too tech savvy and would get discouraged at the start of the online application. There's where having a physical presence, being able to talk people through it, sitting side by side at a computer can be very helpful. Also having paper forms that people can use if that's what they're more comfortable with. But I think it's overly optimistic to expect we can just send people a link to the application and they'll immediately be successful.
For some of our, I know we have some housing lenders on the line. Is there anyone that wants to share from the housing perspective? In the meantime, Diana says business plan is time-consuming depending on the business, such as construction loan for equipment. Undefined goals are a big one, too. She says we got people coming in out of her office. Isn't that the way it goes? So.
Jonelle mentions developing a relationship with the CDFI and commission. I think that's so critical. There is no such thing as a loan application process that isn't sometimes frustrating. But if you have that relationship and the trust that you've developed with your clients, I think they're willing to work with you through this.
Right. Right. And it's so sad, right, because the other place that people can get capital sometimes, right, are online lenders where all they're doing is clicking a button and they're getting predatory products. And you guys are the other source, right? So that is, I think that what makes that work is that they trust you and know you, for sure. And collection and judgments for our mortgage product. Thank you. That's helpful for the that credit component and the is building out that credit and fixing all those collections and different things as serving as the barrier for some of you who are facing housing.
Yeah, I think we discussed that in the goals and priorities section a little bit. That it may take time to get your client loan ready for the product they really want, but there again, because you can be in relationship with them, you can help them identify other things and other resources they can use to get ready and really succeed at their overarching goal.
Mm-hmm. I will say it's really critical in the housing space to have some success stories of people that are just like them in that space. So, for example, one of the borrowers we used was our first credit builder loan product, and she went on to get a house. But she was very willing to let her face be plastered up there and be like, my credit score was terrible, and here's what it was. And eventually, but that was so huge for people to be able to see that in the office and be like, oh, yeah, I see what's happened here. I can't lose heart in that space. So thanks for sharing, Natasha.
Okay. So next we have strategies for follow-up and keeping folks on track. Scheduling follow-up is key both for your clients and staff. Follow-up helps avoid procrastination and keeps the process clear for clients by spelling out next steps. I am a terrible procrastinator, I'll admit it here. In front of God and everyone. So I would always put follow-up with clients. I'm going to call this person on Thursday afternoon because I know they're generally not busy on Thursday afternoon, and we're just going to keep that wheel squeaky.
Mm-hmm.
Clear assignment of duties. So my favorite saying at the Ouista office, Crystal will laugh at me, is everyone's job is no one's job. If everyone at your CDFI knows that client contact and TA is the most important thing, but they have other pressing duties, it's very easy to think, oh, well, someone else will take care of that. And, you can illustrate this by if you have a office kitchen that everyone is supposed to clean up, somehow it never really happens. Those dirty dishes just appear in the sink as if by magic. So that's the same thing that happens with CDFIs. Most CDFIs find it's most effective to have a single contact for each borrower, like a business coach or a financial counselor to help them through the application process. But this is going to depend on what staff you have available and what their specific skill sets are. You have someone who needs to jump in and help prepare cash flow projections versus everyone on your team knowing how to do that. It's just making sure that the borrower not only feels that they have a relationship with your CDFI, but that they have a relationship with Crystal, who is a real person who cares about them and their goals. Be sure to take into account your client's preferred methods of communication. A client who's always on the move might find email more convenient, or an entrepreneur who always lets your calls go to voicemail might prefer a text. Phone numbers, email, mailing addresses, those all can change. So trying to collect multiple contact methods for each applicant and keep your records up to date. Here is where the grapevine can be very useful, because I often found that if a cell phone number changed, one of our other clients knew the updated information and was happy to share it with. Keep clear records of your loan pipeline, which is just a fancy way of saying, where are my applicants in the process? So whether you're using loan portfolio software or a shared Google Doc, your entire staff can stay aligned on next steps for each applicant. One thing we found is that it's very common for someone to wander in and say, I was working on a loan application last month. I can't remember who I was working with or what I was supposed to do. And so you want someone to be able, on your staff, to be able to jump in and assist that person as much as possible, even if it's just saying, okay, Rhonda's going to call you back. We all want to believe that we'll be there every day and always accessible, but people get sick, people go on vacation. You should go on vacation. You should encourage your staff to go on vacation. Not doing that leads to burnout. So keeping all that information centralized helps you cover for each other when people are taking needed breaks, and track workloads across your staff to project what your staffing needs and what your loan capital needs are going to be.
Yeah, and I would just say along with that pipeline monitoring, it's really helpful to, I think we're all so busy, this just goes back to the broader picture of the organization, but having clear goals for lending, having targets that all of the staff are aware of how many loans you want to make, and those sorts of things can really help keep the momentum through the pipeline process, because it's so easy for us to get tied up with, oh, this person is going to do all the classes, and this person is going to do all the things, and this person is in charge of this, and but having good centralized goals of, we want to make, we're going to make 20 small business loans this year, or we're going to do 5 new mortgages, or those sorts of things. Having some enthusiasm around shared goals, that will help as you track that pipeline and help you keep wanting to build the momentum through that as you work with your borrowers. so that it's not just about the number of people that are going to your classes and those sorts of things, but it's really about how many people are successfully accessing capital and using it to change their lives too, making those next steps.
Jonelle asks, best tools on developing and using a pipeline. We have Otis and Down Home. I do know that Down Home has a specific module for loan pipeline. So if you don't have that already, you might look into, get a demo of that, see if it fits your needs. I think Crystal can speak to Otis.
Yeah, so how you would track that in Otis is you would have different roles for people. So you'd have a loan inquiry role, and you have a loan applicant role, and you have different things like that, and then you transition them to new roles through the system as they go through. And so then you could just pull a simple report and say, oh, here's all the people we have in the inquiry stage, here's all the people we have in the application stage. So there are definitely ways of doing that using those systems. But Rose asks a great question. Is there any other software that one is using other than Otis and Down Home? I think people, of course, use T, and I think T has a similar sort of pipeline monitoring component to it. I'm not as familiar with that one, but
I think a lot of people track their pipeline specifically in an Excel document. Excel can do a lot of things. Don't knock it.
True. It's true.
And especially if you're dealing with a small number of loans, maybe don't run out and get a big piece of software just to track something that can be done very easily in a simple and free application. Google Docs has an Excel clone in it. You can use that for shared documents if you want. If anyone else has something they're using that they'd recommend, or something that they've tried and found not to be successful, please share that in the chat box.
Andrea's typing. Oh, Andrea says, we utilize Counselor Max, which is more of a housing counseling client database. I don't think it tracks pipelines specifically. Nancy says T. Yep. Cool. Great.
I think Andrea's comment reveals something, that depending on the loan product, the pipeline is going to look different. We keep using small business loans as the examples here, and I think that's often the loan product with the most drawn out pipeline process. Sometimes a consumer loan, the pipeline is getting the person the needed financial education or credit coaching, whatever it is that your process requires. Getting them to an application and getting that loan from application to funding in less than 2 weeks. It's maybe not a complicated process that you need to track during the loan application process, but you might have a pipeline that's more about who has received our financial education services, who has expressed interest. Victoria says, we use Google Docs. Problem we run into is that it doesn't load all the time.
Yeah. Folks can use SharePoint as a shared document service themselves. Mazda Sky uses T from Common Goals, and VistaShare Outcome Tracker, which would work the same way as Otis does as far as assigning different roles to the clients.
If you have unreliable internet service at your location, you may not find some of these online options as attractive. So it's just a very individualized decision-making process there. Some of our CDFIs, they're out and about and visiting lots of different locations. So something that they can access online or access using a laptop or smartphone is ideal, but others, they don't have the internet connection that they can rely on, and that's not going to Great. So Mazasca uses T and Point, which is a mortgage software.
Very cool. And then Rose has asked a question for your loan pipeline. Do you enter them into down homes? Those of you who are using down homes?
So at Awista, we don't enter our pipeline into down home. We use outcome tracker.
Cindy similarly says they do not. I think you can though. We just keep all of our outcome stuff in one place. Or try.
Overarching piece of advice to CDFIs: try not to do things twice if you can stand it. We do use down home for our portfolio, but we do not have the pipeline module because we're already tracking that somewhere else, and Lord knows I don't want to enter anything twice.
It's hard enough to get it entered once, right,
yes.
Guys? Oh. Well, that was great. Those were some great conversations that popped up there. So with our remaining time, we just wanted to ask some questions about what strategies have been the most successful for keeping your clients on track. Is anything to share? We've got some very experienced, awesome lenders online here, and we want to hear from you. Tricks that you guys have developed over time?
Or if you have a problem you keep running into that you haven't been able to find a solution for, ask that question here, because we want to use the expertise of everyone in the field to try and help you out here.
Ooh, Sharon says, I created a business plan outline so they understand what is being looked for and where that information should go in their plan.
That's great.
Good. Yeah, having really simple to use tools like that are great. Having a great office manager, Nancy says.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Colleen says relationship is very important. Raven says her links to the Otis for Client portals haven't been successful for my clients. I think other folks have struggled with that too, that have tech-related issues there too. So thanks for sharing, Raven. Sharon, would you be able to share the information with our program? Ooh, I love this. There's some good stuff happening here. At loan closing, we are very clear on expectations and the result in better experiences and follow-up from our clients.
I think Alana is exactly right, that communication at all points of the process. We didn't touch on loan closing in this presentation, but the same elements apply, the same guidelines apply after the loan has been approved. Make sure clients understand your expectations up front, be clear with them on timelines and consequences, and also really emphasize that this is an ongoing relationship, that you're here to help them through difficulties, and that, you know, what distinguishes you as a CDFI is that you can be more flexible and friendlier than some other financial institutions they may be familiar with. So use that, and use the guilt of, well, if you don't pay us back, then we won't be able to make loans to other people in the community. So sad. To encourage them along the way.
Yeah. So Sharon has agreed that she's going to, there's a few people interested in seeing her business plan outline. Yes, please send it to us. We can make sure to distribute it out. Love it. That's great. I'm not sure I'm capturing all the comments here because there are so many good ones. But else's communication with clients, yep. Ooh, Rose shares, we ask for short and long term loans in our financial education class to keep them utilizing our services and developing relationships. Financial coaches are what we have considered by our clients and have been working for years. Love it.
Yeah, so a lot of CDFIs, you may be known in the community as an education organization and not a loan organization. But that's getting those potential borrowers, whether they know they're potential borrowers yet or not, in the door and building that strong relationship from day one.
Alana says, can you share the chat dialogue after the webinar as well? I'll have to check with our partners, ICF, on that, but I'm sure we can figure out a way to make that happen. And then our financial literacy class certification required for applying a loan expires within 6 months. Ooh, very good. Yeah.
Yes, I think, Francis, setting a deadline, even if that's a slightly artificial one, can be very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I really love our loan committee is meeting 2 weeks from now. I have to have all your materials in by the end of the day Friday, or we won't be able to present it. That helps both the loan officer and the client, just providing a nudge to keep them on track. As a procrastinator, admittedly, I understand, and deadlines help me, so they can also help our clients.
They definitely help. I would also recommend, many of you use this for those of you who are doing some sort of coaching, but having, even for those who are you're kind of coaching through the application process, some sort of client action form where you're sending them home with their little to-do list and trying to give them deadlines on that client action form can be very helpful. And Diana says, speaking of which, when is the next BNC Train the Trainer? For those of you who are not as familiar with WISA provides a Building Native Communities Financial Skills for Families Train the Trainer program. We do not currently have the date set, Diana, for the next one, but it will most likely I would guess early in 2020 at this point. But we might be able to get one scheduled in sooner. We will have, however, a financial coaching training coming up shortly. I think it's in October or November. For those of you who are working one-on-one with clients and wanting to try to encourage that engagement process from one-on-one and trying to keep your clients coming back, that would be a really good class for you all. Ooh, she says. Yep. I love it. Ooh, and Megan is giving some good advice around how to save the chat dialogue. Okay, put it in a Word document. That's great.
Raven asks, is that online? I assume you're asking about the training. Our trainings are in person, except for wonderful webinars like this, which we are grateful to the CDFI Fund for allowing us to put this on for you.
We'll send that information. Ooh, Andrea says, our client action plan is definitely helpful and includes client actions, coach counselor actions, targeted completion dates, goals, and progress on goals. Yep, huge.
Wonderful, Andrea.
Well, I think we got some really good strategies there. That is exciting. So we want to make sure that we have a chance to keep this dialogue going. If you are having specific questions that you want to work through, if you want to try to do some sort of fun conversations, maybe you want to try to work through something like the client action mapping or something like that, we have our office hours scheduled, which are tomorrow at from 1 to 2 Eastern Standard Time. We'll send a reminder about that after the webinar too, so you can go.
Great. Thank you, Crystal. This is Sierra. I wanted to jump in and say, yes, we will send, if you want more or have individual questions that you'd like answered or want to discuss more with our lovely trainers, please join us for office hours tomorrow. That's an hour. It's kind of open forum style where they can go over those kinds of specific questions with you and help you troubleshoot or connect you with resources, that kind of thing. So we will be sending another registration reminder specifically for those office hours right after this call. So if that sounds good to you and you don't think you're registered, please jump on that registration reminder. The other thing that I would love for you guys to help us with is filling out the evaluation. So we'll send the evaluation afterwards in an email, but what we would actually love is for you to use these last 3 minutes that we have in the webinar to go ahead and fill that out now. So Ben Miller just dropped the link to that in the chat. So if you could just do us a favor, click on that link, fill that out for us. It's very, very helpful for us to know, what was helpful about this webinar, what was less helpful about this webinar, what you would like to know more about, that kind of thing. So it's very short. It's not going to take you more than 5 minutes, and it would be very helpful for us and for the trainers if you could do that for us before you sort of close off this call. Thank you so much for coming, and maybe you can drop that in the chat box again one more time here. All right. Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you all so much for taking time.
This was a total blast.
Yeah. We look forward to continuing the conversation tomorrow during office hours.